It's such a humbling moment to stand in front of you, and humbling because I was actually not the person to stand here. Brenda Lebowitz, that we all know, approached me a month and a half before this conference because she was meant to give this keynote address, and she asked me if I would do it because she felt it was appropriate. At the time, both of us didn't know that she won't be with us right now. And so my sincere tribute to Brenda, whom I met when I was an undergrad student in the early 90s. And he became a mother more than an academic to me, and supported and encouraged. And when she saw seeds of, she would say, greatness, she will just nurture those and support and open spaces. So she's been continuing to do that until I became a member of academic community. And higher education has really lost in Brenda. And she passed away a week after we were together on this project. We were working so well with that team, as you can see the team there. And she had this ability to hide how bad the situation was. We would sit with her, and then she would go to the bathroom, she would come back, and you could tell that she was struggling. But the academic project for her was a priority. So just for a few seconds, I'll ask us just to have a moment of silence, just in honor of Brenda. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, colleagues, I've been asked specifically to talk about the Southern African Rurality in Higher Education project and base my keynote on that. And it's a project that is made up of, it is a project that is made up of several colleagues. Obviously, in the South African context, we had Brenda as the principal investigator, and then we had Sue from University of Bristol. And then that is the team there, as you can see. We began the project in 2017, and the real issues that we wanted to focus on in terms of this particular project concerned issues around transition. And we targeted second-year students, because in order to attend transition, it's better to engage, we felt, with students who have completed the first year in the university and are now in the second year, and they could hopefully reflect in ways that will be meaningful. And so we chose second-year students. And the real focus was on how they transition from learning within school and home, not just school, but also and home in rural context to university learning. Okay, so what is it about home and schooling that they bring into higher education? So that was mainly one of the things. And in order to achieve what we wanted to achieve, we wanted them to document. So students went, we weren't calling them study participants, but they were co-researchers. So we are generating this knowledge together with students. And so there's an element of agency there. We're giving students that agency. So we're not studying students as objects, but we're co-creating knowledge with them so that we can also learn from them. Students are not coming just to learn from us. We are also having them so that we ourselves can learn and be taught by our students. And so we have them as co-researchers. But the key question that we are asking is how learning in rural context helped or inhibited their negotiation of the transition into higher education. And we felt this is a very important question, a question we cannot ignore, a question that we felt will inform our choices in terms of the theory that we chose to use to read the world that they were going to create with us through research, the research methodological choices. So that question informed all the choices because we really wanted to make sure that we're not reaching conclusions and make decisions on the basis of just us and our own views. We wanted them to be very involved. Now, the concept of rurality itself is quite a difficult concept. And we took a while as a group to agree that actually rurality is not a simple concept to actually define, given how our country has evolved historically. Urbanization, migration, rural areas themselves starting to have resources that we have in urban areas. And so we really grappled with that concept. But we kind of use Roberts and Green's concept of rurality, and having engaged with it, we decided it is demographic. In other words, it is generally a very racialized category. It's mainly for a particular race group, at least in South Africa, when you talk disadvantage and access to resources. And it's geographic, owing to the Bantustan policies in our country, which we all know about. And it is also cultural and contextual. And so we realized that if we wanted to define rurality in ways that won't attract criticism, we needed to be as open as possible without losing especially the cultural and contextual aspects of it. So our study tended to focus more on the cultural aspects of it and the contextual aspects of it, and learning in those contexts. And so, as I already said there, that the few students from rural areas that gain access into higher education, they really experience higher education differently to the majority of students. Actually, as you will see later on, that students who come from rural areas, there's something very specific about how they experience higher education as opposed to students from black townships, for instance. There's certainly a difference, and as we will be discussing, of course, there are overlaps, but there are specific differences that we want to draw everyone to. And so, yes, access coming into the university is now policy, but generally what data shows us is that for students who come from rural areas, things are changed to remain the same. That yes, they have been allowed in, which is a change, but once they are in, generally things are just still the same. And so it is important for us then to engage with this and to think about how do we make things change and really change, then just change to remain the same. And so we had a series of research questions that we wanted to generate our data in relation to. How can the complexities of rurality be conceptualized in relation to our education? Because we accept it is complex. Rurality is a very complex, concept. So we accept that. We're not naive about that. But we're wanting still to say those complexities, as complex, as nebulous the concept of rurality as it is, we still need to ask ourselves how, in relation to our education, these can inform our practice, our curriculum design. So that's the first one. What are the dimensions of rurality as experienced by students transcending from home to university in the global south? All right? That's the second. The third one, how and in what ways do students negotiate this transition from rural home, rural school, rural community? And how does this influence their trajectories through higher education in Southern Africa? And Southern Africa, because the project involves 9 other Southern African countries. So it's not just South Africa. It's SADC region, basically, all right? Countries in the SADC region. And the last one is, how and in what forms might inclusive and living curricula, I think for me this is a key word, living curricula, be developed that build on the experiences of all students, including those from rural contexts in South Africa. So this is a bigger question. This is a bigger question. So the question is that this last question in particular is how do we make higher education a home for all? How do we ensure that every student who comes into higher education identifies with the space and knows that this is my home, home in every sense of the word? So these are the questions that we had. Of course, as you will see in terms of data, I won't be referring to data that answers all these questions, and I'll discuss that later on. All right. Now, one of the things that we acknowledged as a team is that we cannot talk transition without talking decoloniality. It's just impossible. And so one of the things that we thought we needed to really, really address ourselves to as a team, it is to that question, how can we not speak of decoloniality in the 21st century? How can we not do that? And so we felt any talk of transition, any talk of making higher education a home for all that does not engage with the concept of decoloniality, it's just going to be the old practices that construct students as a problem and universities as having no problem. And so we will construct students in this deficit discourse. Students will be the ones who need to be fixed. Universities are fine. And so the question then is, who is underprepared really? Is it students or is it academics themselves? All right? Are we having underprepared students or are we having underprepared higher education institutions? All right? And so if we ignore the decoloniality, then we will continually and perpetually treat students as a problem, but ourselves. All right? And so it is important, we felt. And one of the reasons I've put that question in the negative, how can we not? It's two reasons. As I just said, we cannot dissociate anymore the work that we do within our disciplines from a reflection on its political and institutional conditions. So if I teach history, or I teach geography, or I teach mathematics, or I teach biology, I cannot any longer dissociate that discipline from a reflection on its political and institutional condition. I cannot do that. And I'm talking about mainstream academics. I'm not talking about academic development centers, which I will be talking about later on, whether or not we have a place for academic development centers or we need something else, if we really mean what we say about making universities a home for all. And so the first reason is that the reason I have put my question in the negative. The second reason is that how can we not give notice of the preventive? In other words, some of the typical risks or traps to be avoided when talking decoloniality. So what is it that as a team we felt we needed to avoid in talking about decoloniality? But at the same time, we have to talk about decoloniality. So that is why the question is put in the negative there. The point is, therefore, that when we reflect on research and knowledge generation, we can no longer do that outside the context of striving for decoloniality. And I'm wanting to talk about what we mean by decoloniality. It's been a buzzword, it's been thrown around, and we attempted, if you like, to make it clearer. What are we talking about, really, as a group, when we talk about decoloniality? And we did note, as I will be showing later on, that it has to make its way through our research aims, our research norms, and our research procedures, this concept of decoloniality. So, what is decoloniality? But before we talk about decoloniality, we'll have to talk about coloniality itself. Then we can talk about decoloniality. And we agreed that it is a condition. Coloniality is a condition. It's a condition. It's a particular way of reasoning, a very strong, entrenched way of reasoning. And that reasoning sees inferiority in anything or of anything other than European or white. Okay? So that's coloniality. It's a condition. It's not people. It's a mindset that if it is not from Europe, if it is not white, then it must be inferior. It's a condition. It's a condition that we are all victims of. Black, white, Indian, colored, all of us. We are victims of this condition called coloniality. And it is disguised as modernity, or modernization, or civilization, or advancement. Today, globalization. So what actually globalization means is be like Euro-American ways of viewing the world. Then you are up there. Our ministers, of all ministers, all ministries, when they give talks, often Euro-American contexts are used as a standard. We all have to. This is the model. And that is coloniality. It's a sense that something other than white is inferior. Okay? And these are the kinds of conversations that we have to have in an open way, without getting emotional or sentimental, and just be intellectual about it, because that's what academia is about. It's about engaging at the level of ideas. And so, disguised as modernity. Now, we all know, all of us, we did history or some economics or something. We know that I did literature, and so we had kind of period literature that was written around the period of modernism or modernity. And all we saw in terms of the novels, the poems that we read there, it was about industrialization and how beautiful industrialization was, because it enabled people to own businesses, individual wealth creation, nation-state expansion by the colonial powers. So you started factories here, no more space, go elsewhere to expand again. And so the novels and the literature, everything that we read was praising how wonderful, but the focus was always on the brighter side of modernity. That's the brighter side of it. And the thing, though, is what it did is it created a very strong ontological density for the conqueror and their descendants. So when we talk about ontological density, we're talking about a sense of self, ontology having to do with being, all right? And so when we read literature in the lecture hall that constructs Europe as a conqueror, as victorious, those who are in that group feel affirmed, and the sense of self is enhanced, all right? So, but there's a darker side of modernity that Pan-Africanist literature and scholars revealed to us as we grew into postgraduate studies of literature, which we didn't know about as undergrad students. All we knew as undergrad students was we were conquered. Oh, poor us. That's all we knew. But the darker side, as we grew into postgraduate studies, honors, masters, PhD, then we discovered actually there's a darker side to this modernity, and that is slave trade, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, neocolonialism, neoliberalism. Today is globalization. So we realize as we grow that actually the narrative has been one-sided. Okay? So the winner, if the winner tells the history, what do you think you're going to hear? You're going to hear the version of the victorious person. Okay? If I were to come to your home and kick your butt and then tell the story, obviously the story I will tell is a story from my point of view. Okay? But what happened is we realized actually that what all these things are slave trade, which led to, which ensured wealth creation, because it's cheap labor. You're not paying these people. Once they start coughing, you basically shoot them because they are no longer relevant. Okay? So that's the darker side of modernity that we never hear about. And so what did it? So the darker side creates what? Weak ontological density for the conquered and their descendants. A sense of inferiority, a sense of, reinforced through the media, reinforced through advertisements, reinforced in various ways, schooling, curriculum, and so on and so forth. All right? And so maybe to come back. So what we realize is that actually there is no difference between all these things: slave trade, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid. There is no difference. Today is called globalization, but it is still having a sense of bowing to a particular worldview and make that worldview a standard for everyone to emulate. And so what it does is it obliterates difference, it obliterates ethnicity, it obliterates who you are as an Afrikaner speaking South African, as a Zulu speaking South African, as a Xhosa speaking, and the values, your values are obliterated once we embrace globalization. Because globalization is equal to Euro-American worldview. That's what globalization in its fundamental sense means. But we have embraced it as if it's the right thing. But in fact, it has huge problems. Okay? All right. I also want to say that actually decoloniality, or if you like, decolonization, is not, decoloniality is neither transformation nor decolonization. So I think we need to separate those things. And we agreed as a team that transformation discourse has ensured that things are changed to remain the same. So transformation has failed South Africans, all of us. Because what transformation actually has done is basically about changing the form, but leaving the content, the substance, the same. So if I were to pour water in this glass, it will be shaped like the glass, but I can take the same water and put it in the square-shaped container, and it will look like a square-shaped, but it will still be the same water. So that's what transformation has done. Put black faces there, put black women there, put women there, but all they have to do is to slavishly observe what is already in. So transformation has failed the nation. We don't need transformation, we argue in the program. It's not working. If it is working, why are we feeling the way we feel 24 years later? It's because it's not working. So the problem is not have a black face, have a woman. That's not the issue. The issue is what are the mindsets that precedes who comes into the position. Okay? So it is not who is there. It is what informs what is there. What influences the structures? Which worldviews are dominant? Whose worldviews are dominant? That's what the issue is. And so we agreed that transformation is not decoloniality, because it has produced radicalism in Western-trained minds. Okay? That's all what transformation has done. So people who still see Euro-American ways of reading the world as superior appear to be radical now. They appear to be radical, but actually, if the mode of reasoning is still the same, if a child who comes from Mgqwashu is in my classroom, and I have a mindset of, oh, poor her, I just need to help her. As long as we still think like that, we are not, we are colonized. We have coloniality now. So we do not believe a child from Mgqwashu or Inanda can teach an academic professor something in biology or in science or in mathematics. So we write radical papers as academics, we get published, we get we get called as keynotes, like Emmanuel is called right now, because he's written this amazing theory on how we must transform. And it sounds so radical. But in my class, the way I see my students is not aligned with the paper I just published. So just because I'm radical in my opinions, it does not mean my mindset has transformed. And so we agreed as a team that the transformation discourse, all it has done, it has produced radicalism in Western trained minds. That's what transformation has done. We agreed. In terms of decolonization, we also agreed that decolonization was basically a political decision, a political act of changing who is in government. So replacing one's apartheid government of Botha and his generation with Mandela's generation, mainly black. That's all it did. Decolonization only did that. It only did that. The agreements that were reached, to date, we are living with the consequences of those agreements. So decolonization has failed the nation. It has failed the nation because it is a political decision to replace one type of ruler with another. That's all it does. It does not change fundamentally what are the mindsets, whose knowledge we value, who is in our classroom. Are we even interested to know whether this child has had a meal this morning or not? Are we even interested to know what is it that they learn from home that might be usable in teaching them this concept? Are we even interested in that? So the point is that even decolonization itself actually didn't help anyone. We had a huge debate around this with the team actually when we were, should we say decolonization or decoloniality? A long debate, especially with my colleagues from Bristol University. And so we agree that both transformation and decolonization did not succeed in removing procedures, values, norms, practices, thinking, beliefs, choices of a sense of superiority of Europe. Both decolonization and transformation has failed us. Because we have leaders who are, yes, of a different race group, but the policies are still favoring another group. The rich, the big corporates, and so on. And this is not, I hope I'm not sounding like somebody we all know, because that's not what I'm, okay. Okay, it's not that at all, please, yeah, all right. I'm an academic, I'm not a politician, okay? Just the scientist, if you like, yeah, all right. So let's talk about knowledge creation, because this is now coming to transition. Okay, the issues around transition. Let's talk about knowledge creation. That every time we regard something as knowledge, it's because there is a theory that we generate on the basis of which we construct and identify and present something as theory. So theory generation is a hallmark in the knowledge creation process. Okay? So if you can't theorize it, then it's not knowledge, it's just opinion. Okay? And that's what distinguishes day-to-day ordinary knowledge to the knowledge that you and I are busy with even right now. Okay? So that's the first thing that I thought we needed to talk about. I also think we need to agree that in order to generate theory, we need comparison. So we need comparison of events, of experiences, and outcomes. So we need to compare experiences. We need to compare events in order to generate theory, because theory is a combination of concepts designed to explain a phenomenon. That's what theory is in simple terms. There is a reality that we all see, and we're wanting to explain what is behind this reality. And that explanation has tools called concepts that when we bring together, they give a theory. So that's what theory is, really. And so we need comparisons of events, of experiences, and outcomes. But comparison requires a standard. Okay? So we need to have a standard to which we compare the theory that we want to generate. And that's where the problem begins in terms of this keynote and our project and what we are about, which is transition. That comparison requires a standard, good experiences, and the task is to establish a standard that is sufficiently nuanced. So a standard is not just out there by incident. Somebody decides what is the standard, all right? Somebody decides that, and that particular standard needs to be sufficiently nuanced. And this project is attempting, amongst other things, to do that. But we also need to balance between concern about place and ideas as we establish this standard. We need to be very sensitive to the place and the ideas that are shaped and produced and take their form as a result of where they emerge. All right. And I'll be giving examples because I'm about to finish now. And so, to identify a series of connected items upon which to establish trends in an ethically sound way. So, this is the context within which we sat down and deliberated on how to design research instruments. Who do we identify? What questions do we want to ask? So that whatever theory we generate, it will give us trends, but in an ethically sound way. So it's not just emotions. It's not just because I want it to be so. It's ethically generated, and there's consistency around that. One of the things we also had to be careful of is that ideological persuasions need not supersede critique of epistemological orientations we adopt. In other words, many a times our ideological persuasions are undermined and disrupted by the knowledge that we generate, and therefore we need to shift our ideological persuasions. So what often happens is, if, let's say, I am a Marxist, for instance, all right? My thinking, I think about how the means of production are owned by a particular group, and therefore that group is ruling the society, and there's a working class, and they are exploited. That's my ideological persuasion. And then I do research, and then I actually find in my research that, in fact, we will always need somebody to be in charge. For argument's sake, I discovered through my research there has to be somebody who's going to control something, but ideologically, I'm against a group of people controlling something. The point is that reality, that knowledge that I've generated need not be superseded by my ideological persuasions. So it is important, I say this to my PhD students as well, that when you get into a study, do not get into a study already with a particular viewpoint that all you're doing is to generate data that is going to confirm what you're already thinking. Okay, so ideological persuasions must not supersede the epistemology that you generate or the knowledge that you generate. And so we were cautious of those things. So I personally, for instance, grew up in a rural area called Swaiman, for instance, which is outside Pietermaritzburg, 50 kilometers or so. We had to clean cow dung every morning before the lessons began, because though there were not those cows had the freedom to come in and go out and come in and go out. There were no windows. When it was raining, we needed to come closer to each other so that rain didn't hit those who were on the side. That's where I come from. Now imagine I come into this project already with that mind. Even if I discover that actually there's no such thing as rurality, I'll still push it, because ideologically I'm already imposing You understand that? And so it's one of the things that we had to be cautious about, that we do not want to generate knowledge that will impose already established ideological persuasions that we brought into the study. And you will see here how suddenly our data compares to data that we generate about students who come from black townships, for instance. So what do? Oh no, let's kick out the one that come data from black townships because we are wanting to talk about rurality. We cannot do that, and we cannot do that. But you will see how we manage to work with that, actually. You'll see that now. So one of the examples I thought I needed to give in terms of theory and place, theory, place, and time, and who's doing it. We all know Piaget's theory of child development. And one of the things that we said about this is an example of how a theory is influenced and informed by who did it, where it was done, with whom. And so it might be important and wise to interrogate where the theory came from before we embrace it. So Piaget's theory is mainly around a space of a child growing up in a nuclear family where there is mom and dad, and decided to generate a theory on cognitive development or knowledge, cognitive development and learning theory based on a child, a mother, and a father. And as we all know, the majority of our students are not coming from nuclear families. There is grandmother, there is uncle, there is cousin in the same house. So how does it work there? So do we not need a theory that will help us understand how does learning happen in an extended family? Because this one is mainly learning happening in a nuclear family, for instance. And so it is easy to adopt this. So one of the things that have come up as a result of Piaget's theory is learner-centered education, for instance. Individuated learning, that we're focusing on this one learner, and learning is something that happens from inside out. And group work and learner-centered learning without checking which learner, centered on which learner, with which background, in whose language, from which context, with which resources. It's just learner-centered learning. And so in learner-centered learning, as a result of Piaget's theory, you find one and the same students are leading those groups because the formal context of formal education is a continuation of their home environment, where there is a very open kind of relationship, for instance, around dinner table at home. So you have kids who come from homes where you may not be in the same room with an elderly person, simply because you are a child. Okay? And so as kids, you stay alone there. As parents, you're on the side. And so if we're sitting around the dinner table, and I notice this all the time, I ask my son, how was your day? It was like this. Why do you think that? Oh, well, because of this. No, I don't agree with you. I don't think your teacher meant that. I think your teacher meant that. No, Dad, you don't understand. Okay, help me understand. What am I doing? I am already creating a mindset that schooling promotes. Critical thinking, defending your own views, argumentation. And then a child who comes from a context, a cultural context, where you do what your dad tells you, and period. And then comes into my class, and then we have group work. Who do you think will dominate that group work? Is the one whose cultural home socialization is a continuation, sorry, the classroom is a continuation of that cultural background anyway. And so how do we ensure that even the other one finds the classroom as a home for themselves? You see, those kinds of things. And so one of the things that Piaget's theory has done has given us learner-centered education, which today is still not working. Okay? This is just one example, which we are going to show in terms of the data. I don't know, how am I doing in terms of time, Andre? Am I okay? 5 minutes, thank you. Good, okay. So It is therefore possible to be anti-Western in ideology, but pro-Euro-American in our mode of reasoning. Okay, I've already made that point. All right. The last point is this, that we need to develop a new and multiple reference point to develop theory. The world is larger than Euro-American context, definitely. Definitely. Okay. Now, I'm going to our, I've kind of touched on this in some ways, but just to say that theoretically, we use these two concepts. The concept of Hollard et al.'s figured worlds, which is about social encounters in which the positions of those taking part matter. In which those who are taking part, their position, it matters. They are socially and culturally organized, these spaces, and located in particular times and places. So these people, those who come and have encounters in our lecture halls, in our universities, they are coming in and they experience our spaces in ways that often is not a continuation of the spaces that they come from. And so theoretically, that's where we come from. Of course, we're going to read further on this. We also, in terms of identities, that they evolve through participation over time in and across different figured worlds, the importance of agency, and so on and so forth. Now, what I'm going to go do now, because I've already said some of these things, I'm going to move straight to our findings. Maybe the only thing that I'm going to say here in terms of methodology is this, that we had students from 3 South African universities for this project. University of Johannesburg, Rhodes University, and Fort Hare. And the reason we're calling them co-researchers is that they are working alongside us as academic researchers, collecting accounts of everyday practices in the form of digital documentaries, students themselves. We gave them iPads from the project so that they can make digital stories, both during school holidays, university holidays, when they are at home, taking certain pictures and spaces where they are, and conversations in the home, just day-to-day ordinary conversations. And we encourage them to contribute into the discussions and focus. So we had them reflecting on what they brought in the form of documentaries in those groups to talk about them, and we recorded those. And they are also now contributing in the analysis of data. Students themselves are involved in analyzing this data. And they are also participating in presentations. They are also writing with us from the project, and we are publishing with them, both in the website and in academic journals. Because we're wanting them to give voice to what we present to the academic community as findings. Now, I have categorized our findings along those 4 bullet points. They are prior learning in rural areas, their experiences as university students, how they negotiate the transition to university, and what kinds of social and technical resources they draw upon. Now, here are the findings. Okay, here are the findings now. I'm just going to show all of them and then talk about them. So with our students, this is probably obvious, that limited educational resources and lack of teachers in rural schools. We have those experiences of not having a maths teacher or a geography teacher for the whole year, and one of the learners standing and teaching that. We have those. Now, here is what one of them said. Our culture can ground us and groom us into becoming better people. There is a thing that you will never learn at school. There is a thing that you will never learn at school. Okay? And so, if that is the case, what is it about our curriculum that draws from that in order to teach what we want to teach our students. Huge determination by core researchers to overcome challenges. One of them said, because of a lack of teachers, you had to study for yourself. Because at the end of the day, you knew that you had to pass. You had to take the responsibility of learning for yourself. Okay? I'm finishing now. Now that I'm at varsity, I had to start a new life, and it was very difficult and challenging for my first year, because then I was supposed to do my assignments using laptops. I didn't know what they were and how to open them, for instance. Okay? Language as a barrier. Thinking and feeling different to other students and perceptions of not fitting in. Here's what she said. Coming to Joburg is like I'm in a foreign country. Okay? For instance. Here's when one student said, you have to change and the curriculum just stays the same. Right? And this is the last one. Adapting to the changes means changing my lifestyle. That is close to impossible, the student says. It's close to impossible. There's a closer saying that, okay, I'm going to read it in English. Even though I'm no longer in the rulers, the values I got there can never be erased. The education system here purposely or otherwise favors those who grew up in such privileged lifestyles, and that is not of great advantage to rural students. Okay? Most of the things that I was saying. I'm going to close with these questions then. These are the questions that I'm going to close with. How do we develop the next generation of professionals in a manner that instills a sense of pride in being in Africa, identifies with Africa, and aspires to serve Africa? How do we do that? How do our pedagogical practices enable students learn how to know, not what to know? Okay? And then what curricular choices we need to make to foster a dialogue and or contestation among different epistemologies, rather than presenting one set of knowledge as the knowledge. How do we make curricula in such a way that we create a conversation across different ways of knowing from different continents? Yeah. Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Very brief. Thank you.
Take some questions. We might have time for only one, but I'm going to make the suggestion that any other additional questions that we have, we can take them outside to tea time.
Yes.
And address our keynote speaker directly. Are there any burning questions? I have one, actually, if no one else.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to say there is our website there, just to know more about this project. I was really skipping, sorry.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. That was fascinating to hear about the conceptual framework from the project. I wondered, well, two things really. One, if you could explain about the Southern African sort of aspect, because I noticed that you had 3 sites, research sites. They were South African universities. Yes. Yeah. So how does that sort of translate to a Southern African sort of perspective of rurality? Okay. And the other question that I had is, I think we heard a lot about the kind of the content aspect, the methodological aspect, maybe not so much. Yeah. So if you could just address those 2 questions.
The methodological aspect?
Yes, as well as the Southern African aspect.
Sure, okay. Do I take another one or?
Do you have any burning questions now? Oh, yes.
There is.
Prof?
Yes.
Thanks, Prof. I can't quite understand why you've selected rurality as compared to just looking at students. Because it's not always that those from rural-based areas or schools are at a disadvantage. Sometimes they're at an advantage. Because I would imagine that your findings are going to be generalized to students and learners wherever they are.
Okay.
There's differences, but
all right. Let me start with yours because it's still fresh, and then I'll come to you. One of the things that are clear in our findings at the moment is how things such as initiation schools, for instance, which is an African phenomenon, initiation schools, and herding cattle and spending time in the bush, and instances where the chief has to resolve conflict among families, dynamics in polygamous families in an African context, and how 18 kids, 18 siblings negotiate the space and work around. How young stars from rural areas perceive themselves and within that context, and the values that are attached to who they are. Okay, these are just examples that are emerging from the study. Now, those things, initiation schools, polygamous circumstances in an African setup, conflict, negotiating all of those things in those spaces surely develop a lot of concepts that when they arrive in our spaces, they are treated as if they don't know anything, as if they've never engaged critically, they've never thought critically, they've never engaged in a conflict situation and develop huge, extensive interpersonal communication skills. So they come into the university, they feel like, and then as you speak with them, they say, oh, this is what this is, okay? And so we are increasingly finding that out of having to take the kettles to the deep, for instance, and the things that they learn there, I'm talking about our science students, for instance, the things that they already know from just that context, when they come into a chemistry class, those things are presented as foreign to a point where they end up failing, when in fact, had the lecturer paid attention to who these students were, where they come from, what experiences they've had, what spaces, where they come from, a lot of learning has taken place. Chemistry would be so easy. In fact, some kids who are now considered to be dropouts will be high flyers in higher education. All right. So my point is, I hear what you're saying, but I promise as we continue analyzing this data, we're realizing how initiation schools and the things that they are taught there can literally be drawn upon to make accessible a lot of seemingly difficult concepts in higher education. But as I say, as we present our findings, you will see that. I agree with you up to a point. Yeah. Black township schools, students who come from black townships and students who come from rural areas are definitely not the same. Yeah. Are definitely not the same. I think to what extent are we interested in knowing about their spaces? For me, I think that's the question. Yeah. But we'll talk over tea, I know. Yeah. And then we have Zimbabwe, Zambia, Swaziland, Botswana, basically SADC countries that Brenda brought together to form a parallel association to HELTASA, SALT, all right? So you know about SALT Forum. Yeah? So what she has done with SALT is she has brought them into this project. And so the reason you see UJ, Forte, and Rhodes is because this is one arm of this big project. Our colleagues in the SADC region are doing the same thing as well. Yeah. So it's a huge SADC kind of we definitely have to take on from where Brenda stopped, actually. It's just really huge. Methodologically, in terms of data generation, we had 7 sessions across the year where we used different approaches: documentary evidence, documentary stories, they made their stories, collages, where they will draw a river of life. And we also asked them to take pictures around where they grew up, and then we asked them to record without the family knowing, just day-to-day ordinary conversations and things that are happening during holidays and so on. And then we're taking that and then we're analyzing that with them. And it is amazing how rich students from rural contexts are. We don't even realizing it. And so all we think about is they don't know English. But English, as far as I'm concerned, is not the issue. The issue is which world are we imposing onto them? And to what extent are we interested in the world they are bringing into the classroom? English language, as far as I'm concerned, is a secondary thing. See, if I know the world I want to talk about, English will come next. But if I'm confused about the world we are shoving down my throat, and then English becomes a problem. The reason they can't articulate, in my view, the reason students can't articulate themselves in English is because the world they are supposed to articulate, they don't own that world. I can speak broken English as long as I know the world I'm talking about. You see, I learned in Zulu from grade 1 to grade 7. So history, biology, mathematics, I learned in Zulu. And English was taught as a subject. And I only learned in English as a language of learning and teaching from grade 8. And so I already knew photosynthesis in Zulu. I already knew evaporation in Zulu. All I needed was to say the same thing in English. You understand? So the issue is not, in my view, the language of learning and teaching. No, the issue is learning concepts in your own language and within your own world, and then you come into this space just to say the same thing, but in English. Afrikaans has done it. Afrikaans has done it. That's why you had English, Afrikaans speaking universities and schools, because Afrikaans has done it. So I don't need to know English in order to know physics. I need to know physics. And then I will talk about that physics in any language.